It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker. I know him pretty well, Lloyd Kremer, my partner. And Lloyd is, he's spoken across the United States and in England, Ireland, and Egypt on a Nile cruise ship. Some of you don't know these little tidbits about him, so I thought I would put some of them in. He's participated in the Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind extraterrestrial contact protocols developed by Dr. Stephen Greer, a medical doctor and scientist who has spoken to Congress and NASA and other places. Lloyd is a delegate for the Resonance Project with Nassim Haramein, who is a physicist who works with the unified field theory based on geometrical principles. Lloyd is a minister of the Fellowship of the Inner Light, and he's also ordained as a priest of Melchizedek and of Isis. He's been a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada since he was 13. He is a Reiki master teacher also, and he's been a professional actor up and down the East Coast, including comedy improv at the New York Comedy Club in New York City, and has done voiceovers and a few other things. Right now he works for the Langley Air Force Base and is part of our national security. His job is so secret he can't tell himself stuff, is the joke. Very, very high clearance. He has to arrive to work and stick his phone in a Faraday cage. Can't even leave it in the car or turn it off, okay? And he's quite into the computers, the stuff that none of us have, places we've never been, that we're glad he goes there because he uses his ability in a positive way to enhance appropriate security for people. And he cares so much about people feeling loved and being their true selves and using whatever tools will help them and not being stuck in a box. I don't know if he ever had a box. He probably never found one himself. But he will encourage you to jump right out of any boxes you're in and be fine right where you are and be intrigued or agitated or you'll want to contemplate whatever he's sharing today. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Okay, first, let me say that all the opinions I'll be expressing today are mine, not the fellowship's. So if you have any concerns or complaints, bring them directly to me. I can ignore them as well as anybody. No, seriously, if anyone wants to discuss anything I say, I'm always willing to do that, more than willing to do that. I'm hoping to have some fun today, and I hope you will too. And you will, as long as you don't get too serious about anything. Promise? Okay. I'm going to have fun because I finally have a chance to do some rebuttal on a pet peeve I've had for decades. You can go to any state in this country, any city, any town, any rural area, and you'll find at least one, probably several, preachers speaking from the pulpit who never get through telling you, I need the wagging finger, it's part of the statement. What we need is a return to biblical family values. And what they always mean by that is a certain type of family. Two monogamous heterosexual parents with however many children, where all of which are their direct offspring, where the parents preside benevolently over the family. Well, that's one type of family. I grew up in such a family, so I'm well familiar with it. But there are many different kinds of families. There are single-parent families. There are step families. There are adoptive families. There are families with same-sex parents. There are families with transgender members. But if these preachers think that the monogamous heterosexual model is best and they want to advocate that, that's fine. That's fine. That's their opinion. And everyone is welcome to their opinion as long as they don't call it biblical, because it isn't. Have these guys actually cracked open the Bible and read what biblical family values really are? I'll tell you. Biblical family values are absolute, unmitigated patriarchy. The male head of the household is the absolute authority, like God, immune from criticism, and the other family members, especially female members, are approximately at the level of the sheep and the goats, property of the male head of household. And he can do whatever he wants with the female members, give them, lend them, sell them, trade them, rape them, beat them, kill them. And he can do it with absolute impunity because, hey, he's the head of the household. So let's look at a few examples of actual biblical family values. Let's start with Abraham. He's a pretty central figure. Hebrew patriarch of Judaism, founding father of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. Abraham had an interesting encounter with King Abimelech of Gerar. Abraham and his wife Sarah were crossing Abimelech's land, and Abraham said that Sarah was his sister. Then Abimelech took Sarah for himself. Then God told Abimelech in a dream, "Behold, thou art but a dead man for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife." Then Abimelech called Abraham and said, "What hast thou done to us?" Then Abraham said, "I thought they will slay me for my wife's sake." Well, I guess life was cheap in those days. But then this is the good part. Abraham continued, "And yet indeed, she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife." Say what? So Sarah was Abraham's half-sister? Now, I don't want to take anything away from Abraham. He was the father of Judaism. God told him, "Look now toward heaven and tell the stars if thou be able to number them." And he said unto him, "So shall thy seed be." And God confirmed it to Abraham's son Isaac. "And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, because Abraham obeyed my voice." But for all of Abraham's accomplishments and his laudable relationship with God, he didn't seem to have any problem marrying his half-sister. Biblical family values. Abraham said that Sarah was his sister. It's interesting that his son Isaac told the same lie about his wife Rebekah years later, and to the same king, Abimelech. I guess it runs in the family. Let's move on to Abraham's nephew Lot. Now, Lot is the good guy in this story. God spares Lot and his family from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Part of the story is that two men arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot saw them and invited them to stay in his house overnight. But before they lay down, the men of Sodom surrounded the house and demanded, "Where are the men which came in with you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Well, we all know what that means. So Lot refused to deliver the men, but he made an interesting counteroffer. I'll give you the exact quote, otherwise you won't believe it. "Behold now, I have 2 daughters, which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof." So, let me get this straight. These 2 men who are overnight guests in Lot's house, whom he never met before today, are deserving of the highest level of protection. But his 2 virgin daughters, who are his own flesh and who live with him as part of his family, are what? Like expendable? Biblical family values. Let's look at Abraham's grandson, Jacob. Abraham had a son, Isaac. Isaac's wife was Rebekah, and they had two sons, Esau and Jacob. Long story short, Jacob and his mother Rebekah conspired to defraud Esau, the firstborn son, of his father Isaac's blessing. Esau was threatening to kill Jacob. So his mother Rebekah told Jacob he'd better get the heck out of Dodge and go live with her brother Laban for a while. Now her brother Laban had two daughters, Leah and Rachel. And as luck would have it, Jacob fell in love with Rachel, the younger daughter, and agreed to work 7 years for her. But Laban deceived Jacob after the 7 years and gave him Leah instead of Rachel. When Jacob protested, Laban said, "Oh, it must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn." Well, like he might have mentioned that before Jacob worked the 7 years. So Jacob worked another 7 years for Rachel. So both of Laban's daughters were his wives. But just a minute. Rebekah and Laban were siblings. Rebekah's son was Jacob. Laban had two daughters. So Jacob and the daughters are first cousins, right? Marriage between first cousins is not allowed in any jurisdiction that I'm aware of. But Jacob apparently had no problem not only marrying his first cousin, but marrying both of them at the same time. Well, I guess if his grandfather Abraham can marry his half-sister, then marrying both of his first cousins was kind of a walk in the park for Jacob. But that's not the end of it. Jacob also had sexual relations with and children by both of his first cousin's handmaids, Zilpah and Bilhah. Biblical family values. Now, polygamy didn't seem to be a problem back then. I mean, King Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. He got into trouble in that regard, but it wasn't the number of wives, it was the nationality. He had too many foreign wives. One more story. All the stories so far have come from Genesis. Let's jump ahead to Judges chapter 11. A man named Jephthah was leading a war party, and he made this vow to God. "If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the children of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering." That vow turned out to be unwise. While God delivered his part, the Lord delivered them into his hands, and he smote them, even 20 cities, unto the plain of the vineyards, with a very great slaughter. But Jephthah got a rude surprise later, and Jephthah came to Mizpah unto his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and with dances, and she was his only child. So he explained the situation to his daughter, who said, "Okay, that's fine, yeah. Don't worry about it. I understand. You made a vow to God, and now I'm a burnt offering. Okay. Just one thing. Could I first have 2 months to run up and down the hillside and bewail my virginity?" How old is this kid? I'm surprised she knows that word. So Jephthah agreed. So for the next 2 months, the daughter runs back and forth on the hillside with all of her friends. There's a whole bunch of people running back and forth on the hillside, bewailing her virginity. And after 2 months, she reports back to the father and becomes a burnt offering. Biblical family values. By the way, it's not my purpose to criticize the Bible or any characters in it. My purpose is to criticize all these preachers who keep yelling about biblical family values without researching what that term really means. So we've had some fun with these guys. But now, since we've basically been discussing family law in biblical times, I'd like to turn to a subject that is more serious. It's a subject that's discussed constantly, especially over the last couple of years, and that subject is abortion. And my complaint is the same. All these people are shouting opinions about it and purporting to reference sacred texts to support their opinion, but have they actually cracked open these sacred texts to see what they actually say about it? We're going to do that right now. Most of the people expressing opinions on abortion self-identify as Christians, so let's start there. The main document for Christianity is the New Testament. What does the New Testament actually say about abortion? Nothing. Nothing. Not a word. The word isn't even there. Now, some people will say, now, wait a minute, Lloyd, you're not being fair. You can't just do an electronic search of the New Testament looking for the word abortion. They didn't use that word. They didn't have that word. Fine. But let me tell you something about these Bible writers. They may not have always been correct, but they were never at a loss for words. They were professional scribes and authors. If they wanted to say something, they found a way to say it. Here's an example. The Authorized King James Bible was published in 1611. Shakespeare's play Macbeth was first performed in 1606 and first published in the folio of 1623. All those dates are within a few years of each other. Both those works are the same time period, early 1600s, the same language, early modern English, and the same country, England. So we can do some linguistic comparisons between them. In Macbeth, Act 4, Scene 1, an apparition tells Macbeth, "Laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth." But later in Act 5, Scene 8, Macduff tells Macbeth, "Despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou hast served tell thee Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped." Now, this is referring to a cesarean section, not an abortion, but he got the point across. Untimely ripped. We all know what's happening. If these Bible authors wanted to say something, they were never at a loss for words. So why is there absolutely no mention of abortion in the New Testament? Well, the only thing that makes sense to me is that everyone knew the status quo, and they were basically satisfied with the status quo. Otherwise, there would have been discussion of changing it, perhaps by Jesus. So what was the status quo? Well, the status quo for the New Testament is the Old Testament. Jesus was Jewish, remember? Of the house and lineage of David. You can't get more Jewish than that. Circumcised on the 8th day, went to temple at age 12, learned to trade from his father, celebrated all the Jewish holidays and festivals, and never said we should do any different. Oops. Oh well, history happens. Wouldn't that be the greatest bumper sticker of all time? History happens. So what does the Old Testament say about abortion? Nothing. Nothing. Not a word. But I assure you, that wasn't because the Old Testament writers had any reservations about telling women what they could and could not do, or for prescribing harsh penalties for getting it wrong. They had no qualms about that. Menstruation gets a lot of attention, so do childbirth, infertility, sexual desire. In prostitution, the penalty is death. Infidelity, the penalty is death. Rape, if the woman is within earshot of others and doesn't cry out, the penalty is death. And if a woman tries to help her husband in a fight by grabbing the other man's secret area, oh wait, the penalty is not death. Oh, her hand must be cut off. Okay. Of the more than 600 laws of Moses, how many mention abortion directly or indirectly? 0. So again, abortion isn't even mentioned in the Old Testament. But we can infer some things from a certain passage. It's in Exodus 21, which comes right after Exodus 20. What's famous about Exodus 20? The 10 Commandments are in Exodus 20. So it's as if Moses is saying, well, you have the 10 Commandments, but while we're all here, I have some other policies I'd like to dictate. I'll paraphrase what it says. If two men are fighting and they accidentally injure a pregnant woman such that she loses the fetus, and the woman is not otherwise injured, he shall pay as the judges determine. But if the woman is injured or killed, he must pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, and stripe for stripe. Now, to understand the significance, we have to understand the legal system of the time. There were two types of damages: property damages and personal damages. Property damages had a monetary penalty. Personal damages or death followed the doctrine of lex talionis, the law of retaliation, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc. So because of the types of damages awarded, this passage tells us that a fetus is property and a woman is a person. What's interesting is that there's no mention of time. If a fetus is property, then it's property from the first day of gestation till the last. 1 minute before birth, it's still property. That's all we can assume, since there's no mention of time in the gestation period. So we've covered Christianity and Judaism. One more Abrahamic religion to go, Islam. What does Islam say about abortion? Actually, Islam gets my vote as having the most cogent, coherent policy of the three. It actually discusses the various stages of gestation. The Holy Quran discusses it in Surah 23, the believers, ayat 12 to 14. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And certainly we created man of an extract of clay, then we made him a small seed in a firm resting place. Then we made the seed a clot, then we made the clot a lump of flesh, then we made in the lump of flesh bones, then we clothed the bones with flesh, then we caused it to grow into another creation, so blessed be Allah, the best of the creators. The Hadiths amplify this and recognize the process of ensoulment. From Sahih al-Bukhari, number 3036, each one of you is constituted in the womb of the mother for 40 days. And then he becomes a clot of thick blood for a similar period, and then a piece of flesh for a similar period. Then God sends an angel who is ordered to write 4 things. He's ordered to write down his deeds, his livelihood, the date of his death, and whether he will be blessed or wretched. Then the soul is breathed into him. This is the time of ensoulment. Ensoulment occurs at 3 times 40 days equals 120 days, approximately the middle of the second trimester. Before ensoulment, abortion is allowed for any reasonable justification, but after ensoulment, it is forbidden except where it is vital to save the mother's life. So if neither Christianity nor Judaism directly mentions a word about abortion, why do we have millions of people insisting that being vehemently anti-abortion is a requirement of every Christian? When and where did that idea come in? Now, that's a perfectly valid question, and it falls well within the domain of theology and Christology. Normally, I try to avoid discussing politics, but in this case, I can't, because the answer to that perfectly valid theological question is political. The answer lies in the year 1979, when Jimmy Carter was running for re-election as president. A standard tactic of the Republican Party at elections is to claim that the opponent is unsuitable for office because they're not Christian, or because they're not sufficiently Christian. But that wouldn't work with Jimmy Carter, because he attended church every Sunday and taught Sunday school basically every week of his adult life, and he was simply a good and decent man. So they had to invent some way that although he was Christian, somehow he wasn't the right kind of Christian. Now, his church was in the Southern Baptist Convention, and the Southern Baptist Convention was pro-choice. No surprise there, most Christian denominations were pro-choice. The only major exception was Roman Catholicism. There was a meeting of three people: Jerry Falwell, founding pastor of the Thomas Road Baptist Church, a megachurch in Lynchburg, Virginia, and a conservative activist; Richard Viguerie, a Republican operative; and Paul Weyrich, a Republican direct mail specialist. My point is that these weren't exactly the ascended masters at this meeting. It was just three guys. And all appearances indicate that they were much more interested in politics than in religion. They invented the issue of abortion as a religious issue, not political, so they could get votes from conservative Catholics and working class Protestants. In conclusion, I'd like to emphasize a couple of things. I'm not telling anyone which religion they should follow, if any, nor the extent to which they should follow it. That's a personal decision for every individual. And I'm not advocating any opinion regarding abortion. That's also a personal decision for every individual. And I'm certainly not telling anyone how they should vote. That's a personal decision for every citizen. However, if any of you has concern that somehow the Judeo-Christian religion requires that its adherents be against abortion, please allow me to disabuse you of that illusion. It isn't there. Not in the New Testament, not in the Old Testament, not in any version, not in any language, not at all. That idea came from three guys sitting in a room in Lynchburg, Virginia, in the year of our Lord, 1979. From the birth of Jesus till that time, it was never mentioned. So you have a personal choice regarding your religion, and you have a personal choice regarding your vote. But those choices are independent. They're mutually orthogonal. One has nothing to do with the other, unless you want it to. Jesus once said, and I do recognize Jesus as authoritative regarding Christian doctrine, Jesus once said, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." Now, he may have not have known it at the time, but based on that statement, I think Jesus may have been the first advocate of the separation of church and state. What do you think? But why would anyone even want to commingle government and religion unnecessarily? For the answer to that question, I'll refer you to Seneca the Younger, who said, "Religion is regarded by the common people as true, by the wise as false, and by rulers as useful." A good quotation to remember. And thank you very much.